Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could spend a little bit of your day with us, and we have lots to get to in today's broadcast. Starting off, we could be seeing a familiar face heading up the USDA. This week, President-elect Joe Biden tapped Tom Vilsack to be the new Secretary of Agriculture. Vilsack filled the same role for 8 years under Barack Obama. Before that, he served 2 terms as the governor of Iowa. Vilsack would replace Sonny Perdue, who has been the Ag Secretary for the last 4 years under Donald Trump. Market Journal will continue to follow this developing story. Next up, one thing many producers may want to keep in mind while planning for the 2021 planting season is how they can fend off any potential problems. And selecting the right hybrids for corn and soybeans could make a big difference in the amount of disease you could see in your field, as well as your input costs. Market Journal's Bill Dodd has more.
With harvest in the rearview mirror for many producers, many are already turning their attention to the 2021 growing season. There are several potentially problematic hurdles to ensure the best yield possible. One of the highest hurdles, however, is crop disease. Luckily for many producers, selecting the right hybrids could save you some headaches down the road. While many hybrids can help with weed and insect issues, managing crop disease should start with your hybrid selection. When selecting what seed you sow, it's paramount to understand your seed dealer's rating systems in order to ensure you know exactly what you're purchasing.
There's 3 main yield robbers that can happen in corn: insects, weeds, and disease. So disease is definitely probably the top 3 yield robbers in corn. So that's something that needs to be on a producer's mind every time. And then crop rotation as far as what hybrids to select for what kind of disease we're going to be dealing with for the year. Each hybrid is going to handle each disease different. So the rating scales are based off of what our scientists see and how they handle each disease. So nothing's ever going to be 100% a 9 or a 10 tolerant, but they could be a 6 or 7, and that's going to be different for each hybrid. So it's definitely important to pay attention to.
The bacterial leaf streak.
One of the most important steps in making your hybrid selection is making note of the diseases and the degree to which they were present in your fields in the past growing season.
Most of the diseases that we see here in Nebraska in our corn and soybean fields are caused by pathogens that actually overwinter in infested crop debris or the residue that's left in the field or in the soil. So those pathogens are present year after year. So yes, we can expect to see some sort of disease. It might not be the same disease. It might be another residue-borne disease. But once we have that pathogen there in the field and we have the weather conditions, and if we have a susceptible hybrid or variety, we can expect that disease to develop. And knowing the severity of disease in your field can also help you determine, do you need a resistant hybrid or variety that has some disease resistance, or is it low enough that it didn't cause you problems this year?
As these seeds can help in controlling the onset and spread of certain pathogens, you may end up having to use fewer treatments to contain and put down any potential diseases.
In addition, if there are producers that are really trying to reduce or cut some of their input cost, a resistant variety is a great way to do that, because some disease-resistant varieties reduce disease enough that it might mean you don't need a fungicide later in the season, and so that's one option for you. In addition, there are some cropping practices that do create some higher risk for certain diseases as well, and so if anyone is growing continuous corn or continuous soybean or any crop, just know that many of those pathogens do overwinter in that infested residue from previous seasons. And so it puts them at higher risk for disease development next year or the next year. And in addition, if they're also using minimum tillage or no-till, where we maintain residue on the surface for longer periods of time, it might mean they may see more disease risk, and that getting a resistant variety or hybrid is even more important, or they might need to rely more often on foliar fungicides.
Many producers in the Cornhusker State are familiar with overwintering diseases and may need to take action in preventing them again this year. However, there are some diseases that don't overwinter in Nebraska, but depending on where you live in the state, you should pay close attention to the variety of rust diseases.
These are the exceptions to what we talked about in pathogens that overwinter. Rusts don't overwinter. They have to blow in every year from locations south of us. And so rust diseases, you might think, are not staying year after year. But in spite of that, we have seen rust pressure in southeast and south central Nebraska for a number of years in a row. And so I think I would consider a resistant hybrid for southern rust, especially in those parts of the state. In addition, for soybean, there's a number of important diseases there, and we have good resistance for many of them in soybean. Sudden death syndrome is an important disease for many people, and the very best way to manage that disease is with a resistant variety. And we know we can reduce disease severity by up to 80%. And then we have options on top of that to add a seed treatment fungicide, like some of the newer products like Olivo or Saltro that will even more so reduce disease. We also have frog eye leaf spot, like the picture behind me. And so that's one we've been watching closely because we've now documented fungicide resistance to the Group 11 QOI fungicides right here in Nebraska. And so if you've had trouble managing it with a fungicide, that could be why. But one other option you have is to plant a resistant variety. Now, those are a little harder to find, especially in the northern climates in Nebraska, but there are some out there.
So if you've had trouble with diseases in the past few years, it may be time to research a hybrid that can help you clear those hurdles. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. When it comes to purchasing seed, sooner is usually better than later. And aside from the possibility of lower prices early in the seed buying season, buying earlier could ensure a greater variety of seeds to choose from. For more information on this topic, check out the link. We've got it on the Market Journal website. Let's jump right into markets now. I was joined this week by Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman to talk prices and some things happening overseas. But we began by getting a look at the December WASDE report.
Yeah, the market a shade disappointed today. Troy just did not see ending stocks tighten up, as much as it had hoped. No changes in the corn balance sheet domestically. Trimmed, Argentine production a bit to acknowledge the dry weather there. But yeah, really the USDA hitting the copy and paste function today, really electing to wait until we see additional information, in the January reports, that being final production. We've got a stocks report as of December 1st. Those are always interesting. So I think we chop sideways, in the corn market as we just wait for more information. And it's really back to focusing on South American weather for both commodities. Beans today, the USDA did acknowledge, higher crush demand. We've just had a record pace. We set a new record every month for the month with crush. So the demand items are still very robust, but the USDA has done a fair job of acknowledging that in prior months. So no surprises today as we wait more information in January.
And you touched on it already, but give us a quick check on South America too.
Certainly the growing season, every day is the market's watching the weather forecast and how that changes. It's been well documented that the subsoil is certainly dry. They went through what would be our fall on a rather dry stretch. And so the market's certainly watching weather forecasts and as they change. As far as planting pace goes, we did see acreage increase in South America this year. They had strong price signals, through the summer and with how their currency trades versus the US dollar. That those producers really had a nice incentive to go out and make sure that they planted those acres, and they did that. So really it just comes down to Mother Nature, and the market is certainly watching that. Had some beneficial rains in the last week, which have kind of cooled the market down a little bit as we watch the weather forecast week to week. So really, Troy, it just comes down to weather and how this crop finishes up and how yields start to come off when, the Brazilian harvest starts in late January.
Luke, there's been a lot in the news the last few weeks about a COVID vaccine. Maybe no market is as happy about that as ethanol because with COVID less of a concern, people might get back out on the roads, go back to work, and just go out more in general. Assuming everything goes as planned with the vaccine, what's your ethanol outlook for 2021?
Yeah, it's kind of the one bearish piece to the corn market right now is certainly what's going on with gasoline demand. We're running 10% below year-ago levels on gasoline demand, which is certainly holding ethanol down a little bit. USDA, again, has acknowledged that with a lower ethanol demand estimate for their 2021 balance sheet. But as we look forward, certainly the broader economy has been encouraged by the vaccine news, really believes that that's a sign of progress, and we're setting ourselves up for a good year in 2021. As it relates to ethanol, I certainly think that's part of that story. One thing I do believe is a change for ethanol long-term is that COVID's really forced the broader economy to change in a way that I believe is going to be fairly permanent. What I mean by that is, you have people working from home. There's going to be less commuting going on as people are more apt to work by utilizing technology and not actually going to a brick and mortar, office building to work. So miles driven by the U.S. Consumer and really worldwide, I believe has hit its peak. And I think permanently for ethanol, that just suggests that, ethanol demand has probably also seen its peak. So I believe ethanol obviously has a better year than it did a year ago. But as we look long-term, ethanol really gets viewed as a transition as we kind of move towards electric vehicles. And that certainly is a conversation that involves the new administration as well.
With the way that everything has been after harvest, does that change how co-ops do business or the advice you provide to customers? Basically, has 2020 been a learning experience for CVA as well?
No doubt. It's been an opportunity to learn. Every marketing year is different. This one's been especially different just with the timing of how markets have rallied. There's been no seasonality to how the markets have behaved this year. Really with the rally coming late and coming at harvest, the best prices we saw were at harvest. So that can happen. I mean, 2 out of every 8 years, we see the possibility of corn and soybeans to behave in counter-seasonal fashion. And this was one of those years. But as far as it relates to, rural Nebraska, rural Iowa, Kansas, export program being up significantly has really been an opportunity for shuttle loaders throughout the Midwest to see additional volume through those facilities. So at the co-op level, we've certainly seen that. We've felt that a lot more bushels being pushed through those assets. And that's a good thing, for the Nebraska farmer. We're exporting a lot more grain outside of our state's borders, which is positive from a price standpoint. And that really comes at a key time because ethanol has been struggling, as many people know, just from a margin standpoint and just overall demand. And what that translates to for the producer is just what's the cash price, what's the basis in your area. Producers have probably seen that it's been fairly typical. And with ethanol really not going at full tilt, it's really the export programs that have been able to keep corn moving from the producer to further down the supply chain. And export facilities and shuttle loading facilities that are in the co-ops network really allow us to do that.
Next week, we'll be joined by author and analyst Elaine Cubb. Next up, the meatpacking plant disruptions in 2020 led many people to look at harvesting market animals at home. Not an easy task. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with Nebraska Youth Meats Extension educator Brianna Buseman to learn how to conduct the harvest safely.
Backups at local meat processors have led consumers to find alternative options. Unable to wait a year or more for an appointment, many are looking to harvest their own market animals at home. However, there are a few key things to keep in mind before you begin.
Keeping food safety in mind, that's everything from the actual harvest process and getting the carcass cooled. So following harvest, you want to get it cooled to the 32 to 45 degrees within 24 hours and to keep it at that temperature. Additionally, as you're fabricating and cutting that carcass into the retail cuts, keeping that environment cool and clean, using clean equipment, washing your hands, and then packaging is also really important for long-term storage. Making sure it's an airtight package and keeping it just cool, cold, or frozen throughout the process.
To get the best quality meat from your home harvest, you should keep food safety and animal welfare in mind.
So in terms of animal handling and animal welfare, it's really just ensuring that that animal is comfortable. Not only ensures humane handling and proper animal welfare, but also can really impact the quality of the final product. And if you're going to put in the time and the effort that it takes to do this project, you want to make sure that you have a good quality, good tasting product at the end. Food safety can also play into this, making sure that you don't get any contaminants during the harvest process, or when you're cooling the carcass, if you let it hang, it can absorb off flavors and off odors. So if you're doing this in a shop where you've done diesel work in the past, it can actually absorb some of those flavors. And then just making sure that you're careful in the environment, that you don't add any spoilage organisms.
The workspace you harvest the market animal in can also affect the overall quality. Brianna says there's one main rule to keep in mind.
Clean and cool. So a lot of times if you're doing this at home, it will take place outdoors. So trying to just keep that environment as clean and controlled as you possibly can. And with the temperature that we've had here recently, overnight it gets really cool. But during the day when that temperature spikes again, you want to make sure that you can try to keep that carcass as cool as possible throughout the whole process.
Harvesting a market animal at home is a viable option, but Brianna stresses not underestimating the task at hand.
The main thing with harvesting an animal at home is it is a very doable task. It's done all the time by people across the country, but it is a very, very big undertaking and something that you definitely want to plan in advance before you try to take it on. Keeping in mind food safety, food quality, animal welfare, as well as safety of the people who are actually doing the task is really going to be key, and making sure that you can cross all of those things off your checklist before even undergoing this task.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. Moving to pigs now, and as Maddie illustrated, the bottlenecks in the supply chain from this spring took their toll on cattle and pork producers. But pork's recovery was slower than what we saw in cattle. Those constraints in slaughter capacity played a factor in depressed prices. Lee Schulz, livestock economist with Iowa State University, joined me this week to discuss current and future price projections in pork.
We got as low as $51, $52 per hundredweight this spring, what we expected, or given the constraints in slaughter capacity. We've seen that again in July. But by the fourth quarter, prices were 72.5 or so. They've averaged so far. That's really unseasonal, where we've seen some of our strongest prices here in the fall. And it's because we by and large cleaned up that backlog of hogs.
And cold storage for pork is down in a big way too. USDA numbers show a 27% drop. When you see that number, what does it tell you?
Well, I think that it does show the efficiency of product movement. Certainly exports and domestically, is we haven't had to stage it in cold storage. Now there's some reasons for that. I think you've seen really strong belly prices that encouraged packers and processors to pull that product out of cold storage, or never let it get there, right? And so I think that really depleted that. Belly's down 57% year over year. And I think you're just seeing the situation where that product isn't intended for cold storage, and just that efficiency of movement there. Now, I will note that cold storage is pretty important from a pork standpoint. Percentage production, it's about 25%. It's down to about 17%. So it shows you that we're not having a lot of cushion there necessarily. Now, when the supply chain's moving as good as it is, that's great, right? But I think there isn't a huge buffer there, and so it's just a thing to keep in mind going forward.
Lee, can you share with us your price outlook as we move through December and then heading into 2021?
So I think the one word is better, and I think we've already really seen that this fall. As we get into 2021, I'm in about that $63 to $67 per hundredweight range. What I'm forecasting is in Iowa, Minnesota, hog price. I use futures price adjusted for basis. That'd be about $4 per hundredweight higher than what we've seen first quarter of 2020. The big ones are the second and third quarter. So there I'm forecasting $73 and $76 per hundredweight averages. That average is roughly $17 to $18 per hundredweight greater than we've seen last year. So on average, price is about $9 per hundredweight, higher than in 2020. That'd be about a $70 per hundredweight average price for 2021.
Okay, so you say those prices are better, but how do those margins look when you factor in higher feed costs?
So better, and you really hit on the situation. It's the higher feed cost. So the model that I have at Iowa State University, it's a model that we estimate both costs and returns, and that model says on a hundredweight basis we're going to see $5 to $6 per hundredweight higher feed costs. That translates to about $13 per pig higher. And so if we look at prices forecast for 2021. They're roughly where 2019 prices were, maybe a little bit better, but the big difference is the higher feed costs and higher cost of production. So, I think we're going to see profitable margins, at least what futures suggest for 2021, but they're going to be modest profitability, and where we're going to see the profitability is during the summer.
And we got to talk about pork exports too. The exports to China have been just wild in 2020. Hey, let's call it hog wild. Even bigger than Japan, who is a big export partner.
113% up, what I seen recently, and it's our biggest market. And you put Hong Kong in there, and that's the biggest region, right? Now, I think when you look at outstanding sales, when you look at that weekly report, it shows, I wouldn't say some changes, but at least maybe a little bit of shift. So China actually is down compared to year ago levels. That's because fourth quarter 2019 was so exceptional for them. They were purchasing product already for 2020. And so, but you look at Mexico, for example, October exports were the largest since March. So, I think you're seeing a lot of momentum, more exports to Mexico. Canada's been the best since 2013. You're seeing some movement to the Caribbean. So it's that portfolio, right? That's why we're seeing exports up 20% year over year. Yes, China's a big part of that, but we also have that insurance policy of that large portfolio.
Thanks to Lee for the conversation. We also want to let you know that beginning in 2021, the USDA will enhance its National Weekly Comprehensive Pork Report and its National Weekly Export Pork Sales Report to provide more market information for pork carcasses and exported products. We'll end things today by checking in with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, I keep waiting for us to get that extended stretch of cold weather, but so far, nothing yet. What can we expect for the week ahead?
Well, Troy, we really haven't seen much of a winter so far. In fact, we've been dealing with these much well below normal temperatures pretty much for the second half of the fall period, especially ever since that big snow event that we had in the western part of the state toward the end of October, and it brought into the wildfire season in the central Rockies. Now, as we go forward, we've seen this system that's moved through the state over the last 24 hours. The models had a really difficult time with this system over the last 7 days. They've been all over the place. They finally come to a consensus during the midweek period. We did get a little bit of a snow event develop, and primarily the most of it fell to the south of Interstate 80, the more significant accumulations in southwestern Iowa. Now that system's moving off to the east. We have a couple more systems that are going to come down the pipeline. At this point in time, it doesn't look like we have much of the way of significant moisture until we get into maybe the second half of next week. And even that system right now is being kept far enough south of the state that doesn't really pose an immediate threat. But I will caution you that we've seen the same results with the previous two systems. One did pass to the south of us, and of course this one did get lifted a little farther to the north. So we can't rule out the potential for some snowfall before Christmas, but it's looking honestly bad for looking for a white Christmas at this point in time. So let's look at the upper air models and see what we can expect as we go through this period. And of course, the energy with the first trough that was responsible for our snow is now passing off into the Ohio River Valley. A second piece of energy is going to follow on its backside. We basically are on the backside of the snow shield, and it's moving off toward the east. So the snow will come to an end this morning. We're going to stay cool, primarily basically normal to slightly below normal temperatures in the 30s. The primary precipitation shield shifts off as we go forward to the day into the Great Lakes. And then as we get into tomorrow, that trough to the south of us starts to move into eastern Texas. High pressure tries to settle in across the central plains. That's going to keep most of the moisture to the south of us. Any of that overrunning moisture will remain in western Kansas and points off to the south and southeast. And then as we go into the day on Monday, another trough tries to start moving in through the southern stream. That system itself with the low pressure in Texas really doesn't have any moisture to work with initially, so it's going to be fairly dry ahead of this frontal boundary as the main precipitation shield stays off to our east. Most of the moisture will remain over the central and northern Rockies. But as we get into the day on Tuesday, this system starts to intensify, pulling cold air into our region. Low pressure basically over northern Louisiana is going to start moving moisture up from the Gulf toward the north. But really it doesn't have much to interact with this cold air, so we're probably looking at a few flurries at the most. And then this trough really starts to wind itself up as it gets into the eastern United States, and we expect to see some pretty significant moisture with high pressure firmly in across the central plains, cooler high pressure over the southern Prairie Province regions. That's going to keep us well into the 30 range during the midweek period as most of the precipitation is on the western United States. And then this big trough starts to really energize itself as we get into the Thursday time period. Low pressure is shown to develop across southwest Kansas and western South Dakota, but again, since that trough is so far back, we just don't have the moisture to feed in to get any interaction with precipitation. It remains over the central Rockies. And then as we go into the later part of the week, this trough starts to dig into western Texas, and it will start to pump some moisture up toward the north. But once again, because it's so far southward, it's going to take a while for this low to really move this moisture northward. But we'll be aware that there is some precipitation showing up in the southern Rockies, and past experience would say that there is a good chance that this will start to lift toward the northeast. The question is when and where will it occur? This may be our last chance to receive any significant moisture because a warming trend is in store for next weekend and all the way into just before Christmas. So we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, which takes us from Thursday through the Tuesday before Christmas, well above normal temperatures. That high pressure starts to build in toward the end of next week. And in terms of precipitation, of course with high pressure, below normal moisture is expected.
Thanks, Al. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media so you can join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.